The Sound of Damian Wayne. Written by Magnoliabee. Read to you by Evie is Evil. Chapter 15. Author's Notes. Hey, totally Tim Drake on Tumblr created some amazing fan art. Check it out. There's 2 links here. My Tumblr, Magnoliabee, also has the art posted directly to it if you don't feel comfortable clicking the links. Happy reading! And you can also go to Magnoliabee's Tumblr, apparently. Alright, on with the chapter. Damian pulled his legs into himself as he watched Dick warily from the couch. His stomach ached. The TV was on, a background news report playing on mute. The captions displayed words he only half paid attention to. Strange activity in downtown Gotham. Outages near. His brother was pouring hot water from the electric kettle into a mug. Damian was reminded of Dr. Dahlman's office. A dull sense of comfort setting in from the familiarity of the ritual. It felt like a fog had been lifted from his head. He could barely remember the last few hours. It was like he hadn't been there, but rather somewhere that existed only in his head. Dick walked over, 2 mugs in his hands. He set one in front of Damian, giving him a strange look. He seemed tired. Damian looked away, knowing it was his own fault for Dick's current state. He sat down in an armchair to the left of Damian. His hands were clasped in front of him, and he stared at Damian momentarily, his eyes narrowing. "It's been a long day," Dick began. His voice was steady. "For everyone, I get that, but—" He paused, letting out a breath. "I'm worried. About you." Damian ducked his head down in what he hoped was a remorseful pose. He just needed Dick to understand that he hadn't meant for things to turn out like this, for his family to have to deal with his sorry situation. But his lack of words couldn't convey such an apology. "I know I haven't been around as much as I should have, and I'm—" His voice cracked slightly. "Sorry for that. I don't want you to be suffering in this silence. No one does. Do you understand that?" He nodded, slowly, uncertain where this was going. Damian waited for the flip, for the disappointment to come in full force. He was ready to take it. "I'm gonna ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, because this is really important." Dick pursed his lips, waiting as Damian inclined his head once more. "Damian, are you safe?" He curled his hands into tight fists. He had been asked that question enough times that day to last a lifetime. And yet, somehow, coming from Dick, it had taken on a new weight. Because what was defined as safe, really? He was fed and clothed, given a roof and parental attention when needed. All of those things definitely fell under being classified as safe, but his body was littered with bruises of varying sizes and colors, spelling a different story for any medical onlookers he faced. Technically, no one was harming him. Not really. It was a curse, not a person. The caster was ill-advised, yes, but seemingly not malicious in intent. That didn't seem like an answer Dick would accept, however. Damian lifted his shoulders up, then down. He didn't know, and that was honest. More than he'd been for a while now. Dick frowned, flexing his jaw. Neither spoke. Quiet settled in the room, making its home with ease. He opened his mouth, closing it, before opening it once more. "I talked with Leah over the phone. Your dad, too. She mentioned that you got some injuries. Do you know what she was talking about?" Damian stiffened. He glanced at his arm, where the bandages had been removed by him a day before. Surely Dick would assume that was what she was referring to. He had no urge to confirm any thoughts his brother might be holding. Alfred's gonna stop by soon, if you're up to it, and you can say no, Dick said with a serious look. He'll want to go to the cave's medbay to check over you. I'll come too, but it can wait if you'd prefer. It's your decision. It didn't feel like a matter he had a choice in, because the implication, either way, was that he'd be subjected to another screening of bruises. He couldn't put it off. And while, for a reason not even known to himself, he may have cooperated the first time, he wasn't exactly intent on acting the same way again. He still attained some of his dignity, surely. Is that a yes? Dick asked, not unkindly. Yes, Damian snapped. He really needed to take a cough drop. His voice sounded too raw. The bruise that announced itself on his upper back would just become another flaw for Alfred to note down. A number on a notepad. The captions take his focus again. Stolen brooch. Galenite. Dick nodded along. Okay, that's great. He hesitated, his hand raised slightly. Damian, I want us to be on the same page. You're not in trouble. So, if that ever crossed your mind, even for a second, it just isn't true. He glanced up, wondering where this could be going. You've been quiet. I've noticed that, and I wanted to ask how you're doing. This definitely had to have shaken you up a bit, whatever happened. Damian didn't bother responding, irritation flaring in his gut. He felt worse the more upset he got, a vicious cycle of self-loathing repeating itself over and over. I know you don't want to talk, but... Dick paused, putting a hand over his mouth. He let it drop a few seconds later, his voice softening again. We're all worried, Damie. He wrapped his arms around himself tighter, fighting to hold in his emotions, trying to spill out from the cracks in his chest. The mug was still steaming. Dick hadn't taken a sip from his either, and Damian felt an odd sorrow for the wasted effort. Dick frowned, seemingly waiting for him to answer, to acknowledge his lies. Or perhaps they weren't lies, yet still, he described pointless concern. Damian had been on his own long enough. What made this situation any different? Can I at the very least feed you? There's no way you've eaten today. We'll talk more about this later. How does that sound? Dick's voice sounded almost pleading, his gaze urgent. Damian stood up, moving towards the kitchen, letting Dick take that as a sign of agreement. He didn't have much of an appetite at all. In fact, the very idea of eating made him feel queasy. But that wasn't explainable, and so he allowed Dick to boil water, dumping a box of penne into a battered pot, all so his brother could have some sense of control. He took some sense of satisfaction from pretending, living vicariously through his brother's own autonomy. Damian considered his options. He wouldn't be allowed out of anyone's line of sight the second they saw the extent of his injuries, which seemed unreasonable. Bruises weren't fatal, though he wondered how he was doing internally. If his body couldn't handle the magical energy, then that must be presenting itself inside of him. The Nicentro was not coming from nowhere, nor could its only effects be periodic bouts of expulsion from his body. He needed access to a magic user. That would slow his state, at the very least. Perhaps giving him time to find Melina and somehow convince her to remove the curse. But unless one his family was friendly with decided to suddenly appear in Gotham, he was out of luck. A plate appeared in front of him, interrupting his line of thought. Dick had a tight smile on his face as he sat down across from him. His phone kept buzzing, lighting up every few seconds with a new message. He pushed the food around as he waited for Alfred's impending arrival. Each creak outside the apartment gave him pause, distracting him momentarily. Dick was watching him, carefully monitoring each twitch of his wrist, each wince of movement. Damian felt sick. Literally sick. He darted up, letting his chair fall to the ground in a dramatic display as he made a break for the bathroom. His feet pounded against the floor as he tried to keep his nausea down, if only for a second. Dick had stood up just as quickly, following him as he shut the door in his face, locking it behind him. Damian ignored the pounding on the door as he positioned himself in front of the toilet, expelling the usual black substance. His throat burned, the taste of iron and bitter oil mixing in his mouth. There seemed to be no rhyme or reason for these episodes. While Melina's efforts had slowed it somewhat, the event was proof that even she could not stop it so easily. His inevitable decline would be obvious and sudden. Dick kept calling for him to open the door, saying other things that only made his head hurt more. He washed any remaining black fluid off his face in the sink. The water was cold, but it kept him alert, at the very least. He flushed the Nescentra down, just as Dick managed to break through the door's lock, a wild expression on his face. "Are you okay?" Dick looked him over, eyes flicking to his covered wrist once again. "Jesus, Damie, don't scare me like that. I didn't... You have to let me know if you feel sick, all right?" Damian rolled his eyes, standing up too fast. He caught himself in the sink, just barely. But Dick only seemed to get increasingly more alarmed. His hands floated over Damian's back, guiding him towards the couch once more. He was muttering apologies for trying to feed him without asking if he was up to it, though Damian knew that was solely his fault. Dick could not read his mind, try as he might. He sat down on the plush seat. A pillow was thrust into his arms, as was a blanket, and he glared as Dick attempted foisting on more items on him as he became increasingly smothered. His head throbbed, a dull ringing in his ears as he tried forcing himself to recover as quickly as he could. Dick looked helpless. Damian couldn't imagine how he was feeling, once more forced to take responsibility for him. What had that call from Leah been like? He had probably been upset. Dick had been busy lately. He didn't need to be dealing with Damian on top of that. There were actual children who required saving, who could be harmed without Nightwing there to help them. A knock on the door echoed through the apartment. It was an elegant sort of 3-knock, an easy indication of who the caller might be. It wasn't so late in the night, barely 6. Damian turned his head away, his face warming inexplicably. He hadn't felt this bad in a long time, perhaps ever. His whole body was sore. It felt like he had fallen off of Wayne Tower. His stomach and head took turns distracting him, throbbing and pulsating one after the other in a rhythmic fashion. Dick made his way to the door with purposeful strides, swinging it open. His shoulders slumped. It seemed he'd been calmed, if only somewhat. Alfred stepped into the apartment, frowning and slipping off his coat. He hung it on the rack he'd convinced Dick to take, arguing that guests would appreciate it. Damian watched as he walked over carefully, Dick following closely. He looked up at Alfred, a grim expression on his face. "Damian, are you all right?" His heart hitched. Alfred's brow was furrowed, and an uneasy look was in his eyes. It was atypical for the man, normally so self-assured. Dick sighed behind him. "I am glad you came. I think he's sick. He threw up a few minutes ago." Alfred frowned. "Did you take his temperature?" Damian had to prevent himself from flinching as Dick suddenly clapped a hand on his forehead. "He doesn't feel warm, exactly. Kind of cold, if anything." "Very scientific, aren't we?" Damian batted Dick's hand away, scowling at him. It seemed to have little effect, only causing his brother to smile slightly, an unfathomable reaction. He didn't feel off temperature-wise, though he supposed he'd been wearing warm clothing as of late, taking care to stay covered up. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility that he'd failed to notice a minute change in his overall body temperature. It was unnerving, listening to them prattle on about his health. They didn't bring up social services or anything to do with the reason why Damian was here. They were outright ignoring the topic, as it seemed. "Damian," Alfred tilted his head to him, "I understand if tonight is not doable for you, but I do need to give you an examination, as is protocol." He said protocol as if it pained him. Damian bit at his finger, staring off as he came to his decision. "Fine," he said, and the flare of pain in his chest seemed to blend in with the rest. One couldn't get used to pain, try as they might, but it did become easier to mask with time. Damian didn't even feel the urge to wince, though he was, admittedly, in a more comfortable position than normal, curled up on his brother's couch. "Okay, we're going to have to travel to the cave, but you'll be back by 10 at the very latest. Rest is vital for illnesses." Alfred looked to the door. "I think it's best if we take separate cars, so Dick can drive the two of you back." Logical, as Alfred tended to be. Damian's phone was charging in the kitchen, and he quickly left to grab it. He could hear murmuring in the main room, a conversation he was not wanted in occurring. "Bruce requested the records for the examination, but—" Dick's voice trailed off as Damian entered the room once more. "You ready?" Damian nodded easily. He wasn't. Not really. There was a sort of acceptance that had permeated his thoughts, denying him his urges to refuse or be more combative, at the very least. The illusion of choice did not fool him. Not this time. The entrance to the cave was hidden on private land, owned by the Wayne Corporation. An abandoned road led to a sensor-activated hidden door, which Alfred used easily. Damian barely paid attention as they weaved effortlessly through the many dark and twisting tunnels, as if there were a map Alfred was following, and not just his memory. Alfred's eyes kept flitting to Damian through the rearview mirror. It made him uncomfortable, so he focused on staring at the window instead. They pulled into the cave's parking lot, around 30 minutes after their departure. Alfred was a smooth driver, less prone to speeding than Jason or Steph. Dick parked beside them. Damian unbuckled, mentally preparing himself as he slipped out of the car. He kept his head low as he allowed Alfred to guide him. Voices echoed in the cave. They fluctuated in volume with an underlying anger in their tone. He couldn't quite decipher what exactly they were saying, but he did not doubt that it involved him, likely what he had done to them. He bit his cheek, crossing his arms around himself. Damian's head hurt. Not from any magic-related reason. It just ached. "We're going to the medbay first. You don't need to see your family if you don't want to. Today has been difficult." Alfred shooed Dick away, ushering him toward the main room, where it seemed the others were gathered. He looked back, a torn expression on his face. "Damian, if you want me there, I can—" "Master Dick, the boy will survive without you," Alfred cut in. Dick nodded, finally trudging off, not before glancing back once more. Damian turned his head. He didn't want to see whatever expression Dick was making. He followed Alfred down to the medbay. It smelled like bleach. He wondered who had been injured recently. The incident wherein Steph's arm was shot felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been a little more than a week prior. Time seemed to stretch on as of late. His days felt drawn out, monotonous. He wondered grimly if he could have kept track by counting his bruises. "Sit on the bed. May I check you over?" Damian pulled himself up onto the medical bed. The sheets were white and pulled taut over the frame. Alfred closed the door and gave Damian a soft smile. "How are you feeling? Is your stomach any better?" He nodded tentatively. "I'm glad. I'll instruct Master Dick to keep you on a light diet. We don't want you sick. Carbs aren't so good when you aren't feeling well." There was a stark difference between Alfred's examination and the nurse at the center. While she had been clinical and detached, Alfred was personal and warm. Damian thought he preferred Alfred's method. "Do you have any ideas for what made you ill?" Alfred asked, his voice soft. He waited patiently as Damian shrugged, nodding easily. "That's all right. It's likely just a stomach flu. Or perhaps you ate something that didn't agree with you." Or perhaps he was expelling a black substance called Nacentra from his body. But that didn't seem like a conclusion Alfred was likely to jump to. Alfred took his temperature, inspecting his eyes and blood pressure. The number read lower than it should have, and Alfred frowned slightly, humming to himself. "Are you feeling lightheaded? Do you need water?" Damian scrunched his nose, not wanting to answer such a question. He wasn't a child. He could take care of himself. He didn't need to be reminded to be hydrated, of all things. Alfred gave him an unimpressed look, but didn't press the matter. "Could you remove your jacket? I need to check your arm and heartbeat." And there it was. He didn't listen immediately, freezing in place. The haze from before wasn't there. His senses were all working at their typical level, and yet he nearly wished they weren't for his pride's sake. So he wouldn't have to remember, and couldn't fault himself for his actions. Couldn't see Alfred's reaction, his shame. Alfred stood close. Not quite hovering, but present all the same. Damian knew there wasn't any getting around this. They'd have the official report soon enough. There really wasn't any point in being uncooperative, and still, he was fighting his own instincts as he slowly pulled his hoodie off. Only that morning had the hoodie ridden up, exposing himself to Cody of all people. The déjà vu of it all was not lost on him. Alfred raised his eyebrows at the bruising on his arms. Most of it was on his torso and legs, nearer to his organs. Damian had yet to show that off. His eyes flicked up to the bruising peeking up from his collar. "Oh, my dear boy." He looked like he wanted to say more, but stopped himself. His expression had fallen, no longer neutral. "Do these ache?" Damian nodded, not seeing the point in lying. They were bruises. Of course they hurt. "I'm going to check on your wrist," Alfred said, his hands moving to the bandaging. The nurse hadn't touched it. She'd asked him about it, if he could remember that correctly, but had been less concerned when he'd proved he could rotate his hand. She'd been more focused on the bruising on his torso, anyway. The handprint had started to fade by now, more green than purple. Alfred hesitated, before seemingly making a decision as he grabbed another roll of bandages. He wrapped Damian's arm carefully, not pulling it too tight. He stepped back, and Damian let out a breath. The worst had yet to come. "Would you be able to remove your shirt for me? I noticed that you seem to have some bruising underneath. Is it okay if I check?" Damian's hands tightened on the bed. twisting the sheets. His gaze settled on the door, the idea of running tempting him. But his family lurked out there, and they would surely materialize if Damian caused a scene. He didn't need them seeing him like this, battered and pathetic. The voices outside had increased in volume, almost as if they were approaching, and he worried if that were in fact the case. It was slow going as he carefully rolled up the shirt. The room was cold, and he shivered before he could stop himself. Alfred's eyes widened incrementally with each exposed bruise. Damian tapped his foot against the floor, his nerves uncontrollable as he finally removed his shirt. Alfred was silent for a few seconds, his eyes darting to each spot. He pursed his lips. "Why did you not say anything?" Damian froze. He knew why he hadn't spoken up. He was incapable of doing so. But he felt like he hadn't exactly exhausted every option, hadn't tried each possible loophole. That wasn't like him. The lack of progress wasn't like him. The lack of decision-making, the resigned acceptance, that wasn't like him. It was as if he'd been underwater, slowly falling lower and lower into the depths, an anchor fastened to his ankle with mere string. Had the curse affected him more than just physically? Mentally, had it sunk its claws into his head, corrupting his thoughts with spreading roots? And somehow, that was more terrifying than any affliction the witch could have cast. More than anything, it was his soul that he took pride in, which allowed him to refine his skills and succeed no matter the stakes. His mind was more honed than any other ability he had. It had gotten him this far, and now it was being taken from him without his knowledge. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For once, he truly had nothing to say. No answer at the tip of his tongue, no explanation he could possibly give that would convince anyone, even himself, of its truth. His head snapped up with the rapid approach of footsteps. His mouth felt dry, dread setting in at the noise. It had been inevitable, yet still, he was scared for some reason. The door flew open with no regard for those inside, as Jason shouldered in, with Tim and Cass close behind. His face was dark, not irritated, upset. It seemed he had some plan going into this, but it fell apart before Damian's eyes, as Jason paused, his fists uncurling as he unabashedly stared. "Damian?" Tim said, his voice having a hollow ring to it. It wasn't quite clear what sort of question it was, whether he was surprised that Damian was in the room, or the sight of his current physical state that was unnerving. "What the hell happened?" Jason sounded incredulous. "You look..." Dick and Bruce quickly pushed their way in as well, and suddenly the room felt much more cramped than before. Their raid was not welcome in Damian's mind. There was a ticking silence as all eyes remained on him. Damian felt like a zoo animal. Righteous anger flared up inside of him as he wrapped his arms around himself once more. His father frowned at him, his face scrunched up like he was staring at the sun. Dick had his mouth slightly agape, his eyes widening slightly with each passing second. "Son," Bruce began, ready to subject Damian to some sort of speech that would only cause him to curl up in shame, embarrassed by his own inaction. But it never came, as Cass's voice interrupted him. "Who did this to you?" Her gaze was hard, icy and serious. Damian couldn't help but look away. A curse? A witch? Himself? All plausible answers, with an inkling of truth, mixed to form the patchwork that colored his body. He wouldn't cry. didn't feel any urge to. But he was upset. It took this long for them to notice, only paying any mind when the issue was glaring in their faces. He hadn't wanted them to know, yet somehow, the fact that his pathetic efforts to conceal his sorry state had mostly worked pained him. He wasn't worth the investigation, only the reveal. Would they have preferred he keep pretending he was fine? Would they have kept their faux concern if he'd hidden it better? If he'd given them time to get distracted by some new case? Damian! Dick sounded horrified, eyes focused again on the wretched bruising peeking up from his pant line on his hips. I'm sorry. Shit, I'm sorry. Was he? Why? He wouldn't have noticed if Damian had hidden it better, if he'd never exposed himself to Cody, if he didn't know how he felt. Was he angry that they'd found out, or the length of time that it had taken? It was unclear. Damian couldn't even trust his own thoughts, as loud as they were. They had been tainted by magic, it seemed. Nothing was his. Jason's lip was curled in disgust. He was turned away, not looking Damian in the eyes. Tim wasn't much better, with a vacant expression on his face. Cass just seemed angry, her gaze flitting around wildly, as if to memorize every inch of him. "It's not your fault, whatever happened," Bruce said, his voice a near whisper. "It isn't." But it was, wasn't it? If he'd been faster in the first place, she'd never have had the chance to cast any spells on him. If he'd been smarter, the curse would have already been lifted. If he were better, then everything would be different, and they could all go back to their normal lives, his presence not able to burden them. The drug bust, the gala, the kidnapping, the meeting with Melina, all of it demonstrated his failure. Damian's thoughts returned to his realization, his lack of action, his acceptance of the curse, his inevitable decline. And it was this line of thinking that led him to a decision, a desperate attempt at understanding. He opened his mouth, ready to speak, and yet, as he tried, he couldn't. His throat caught, and he began coughing violently, shaking from the force. The movement caused his bruising to ache even more. He could feel tears prick at his eyes, an involuntary reaction to the pain. His throat burned, the taste of iron on his tongue. "Damian! What's happening? Is he... Are you..." Damian's body betrayed him while speaking. He couldn't trust himself, couldn't seem to trust anyone. "Out!" Alfred suddenly yelled. He sounded angrier than Damian had ever heard him, and it seemed to startle the whole room. His eyes, once glued to his battered body, now latched onto Alfred. He looked older than he normally did, a fierce look in his gaze as he pointed at the door. Dick seemed ready to argue, but Tim grabbed his arm, dragging him out. Cass and Jason followed, a reluctant expression on both of their faces. Only his father remained, and Alfred gave him a look, somehow soft and yet hard, that finally caused him to leave. Damian grimaced as he spat up blood. It seemed his coughing fit had torn at his throat. He quickly wiped it on his pant legs before Alfred could see. He figured he'd prefer keeping his ailment to himself for now, if only to keep it for a half second longer. Such a secret was his. No one could take that from him. Alfred turned back to him. There was a sadness in his eyes that Damian wasn't used to. "I'm sorry for all of this that you thought you had to hide." He hadn't thought that. He'd known that. Then why did he feel a small sense of relief at Alfred's words? A selfish sensation he quashed, just as easily as he'd felt it. It tempted him to rely on someone else, to unload his burden on a new person. The relief dissipated from his mind. Still, it lingered in the air as Alfred gave him ointment for his bruising, a silence taking over that didn't feel quite as thick. Aid was equal to surrender, but it seemed only death would greet him if he continued. Without a magic user, that was his only option. He had to hold out hope, if only for a little while longer, that help was coming. He didn't want to, not really, but he was tired of pretending, of lying, of hurting. He had run out of alternatives. Damian had failed. He coughed again. What worried him most was that he just wasn't sure how much longer he had. Somewhere, on the floor of a distant closet in a small hotel in Boston, John Constantine woke to the acrid scent of smoke. Ah, fuck! And that is the end of Chapter 15 of The Sound of Damian Wayne. Author's Notes. Hey, a quick reminder that I am a person behind the fic. Not every story is for everyone, and that's okay. But please be kind in the comments. I write for fun, and constructive, respectful criticism is always appreciated. If you're just planning on being hurtful, please don't bother. There is a Podfic now. Evie is Evil created it. Please show them some love for their amazing work. Thank you, Evie. And there's a link to the Podfic, which you're listening to it. So hi! Alright, back to the author's notes. Kind of a heavy chapter, but satisfying, I would like to think. I know Gotham and Bloodhaven are farther away from one another, but in my fic, it's about a 30-minute drive. And yes, Dick, of course, would have been briefed by Leah on the bruises earlier, but I like drama. Also, I have a new profile picture. It's so cute and exciting, by the lovely StarSteph06 on Tumblr and other platforms. Thank you again, Steffi. Thank you all for reading and the kindness and support you've shown. Reader's notes? I don't really have many. I guess notes on this fic. I feel like it puts me into a trance while reading it. I have noticed that my tone has been quite monotonous for this fic. I don't know what it is. It just puts me in a trance. Damian just feels so numb that I can't help but just read it like that. I don't know. We're almost caught up. We're 15 and there's 18 chapters. We're almost caught up with this fic. And once I'm caught up, updates will just be when the fic updates, or a little bit after that comes out. And I will be doing another long form fic after this one's finished, which I already have that planned. Alright. Thank you guys for listening, and bye!